I'm going to be speaking about giving freely of ourselves. What that means and looks like, and what we all gain. And I'll tell you why that has become such a focus for me. I think a lot of us, particularly at this time of year, think about giving. I think that the qualities that we think about at Christmas time bring out a sense of generosity among us. I'm talking tonight about giving freely of ourselves, which is something that I've begun focusing on year-round. And I feel like it's out of necessity. I don't know if you've watched the news or if you've spoken to people in your neighborhood or cul-de-sac or apartment building, or if you're on social media, you know this, that almost everybody feels challenged by something these days. And we'd like solutions when it comes to things like our health, physical health, mental well-being, that's very up today. Relationships and friendships, our professional lives and careers, especially when what we've tried hasn't been as successful as we'd like. We start to look for something new. Sometimes a problem can seem so kind of pervasive too, like crime or a pandemic or climate change or something that we're not sure if we can have an impact. And I think that the temptation in that case is just to step back a little bit and kind of stay under the radar or see if our circumstances change or if somebody else will do something. But there are solutions, that there are good, universal, practical solutions, and we can be part of them. That's what I'm here to say tonight. We can be part of them. It just takes a more spiritual element in thinking. And so tonight I want to talk about a way forward, maybe an unexpected way forward that brings solutions. The ideas in Christian Science, that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight, including this approach of giving freely of ourselves, which I'm going to talk more about, have changed my life. They really have transformed my life. They've transformed the lives of people around me, too, often without their knowing where the blessing is coming from. Giving freely of ourselves touches the world, but it's a way forward for the giver, too. And this is the new part for me. This is why I use the word unexpected or exciting. I probably couldn't have given this talk 5 years ago. I hadn't made the connection yet. I knew that volunteering my time or, being generous, that type of thing, could be a blessing to others. I think that's intuitive. But I had not realized what a way forward it is for the giver, too. And not just because you feel good because you did something positive, and that's okay. But the transformation that I'm talking about when we do this unexpected giving is so much deeper than that. The blessings are so much more practical than that. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. This is about a guy who, I think kind of reluctantly at first, found it within himself to give more, and the blessing that his family found, and he found as well, too. So this is a high school kid. He was a senior, I think, and he was struggling with a sore jaw and swollen mouth, struggling for several days. His wisdom teeth were coming in, but not in a comfortable way. And in fact, he couldn't eat properly. He was getting by on smoothies and shakes and that type of thing. And stoicism, because he didn't want the help or the advice of anybody, certainly not his parents. He was going to get through this by himself. Now, I think he did have some concerns. His face had never looked like that before, and he'd heard stories from his friends. Was he going to need some extractions, or, how long was this going to last? But this guy had had some experience, some success in turning to prayer and finding healing, finding physical cure. His parents were Christian Scientists, and so he had grown up doing this. There was an expectation of healing in their house. There was space for this kind of prayer. And so one evening when the pain was kind of difficult, he went upstairs to his room to think about how he wanted to go forward. And he could hear the whole family downstairs happily making dinner together. And he thought, okay, no more tough guy. I want some help. I need help. And so he decided to call a practitioner of Christian Science. And that is somebody whose full-time job is taking prayer requests and then responding with Christian Science treatment and with healing. And the treatment part of Christian Science doesn't require physical contact. I mean, there's no laying of hands or manipulation or anything like that. It's prayer. It's listening to God in a way that stirs something new in us, that awakens us to the good creation, the reality that's here right now. That type of thinking is different. I mean, it does stir something new in us, and it changes our outlook. And that changes our experience. I mean, it even has a good impact on the body. Well, that was just the type of thing this kid was looking for. So he called this Christian Science practitioner, explained the symptoms to her, and asked her if she'd pray for him. And she agreed, and then the two of them just talked for a little bit. And it came out in their conversation that he was in the throes of buying a new motorcycle. He was really proud of the bike that he'd picked out, really excited about this new chapter of independence and freedom and manhood. He couldn't wait. His parents were not so excited. They were concerned about his safety. And so the practitioner heard all that and just said something really simple in response, just a question. She asked him, okay, is getting the motorcycle right now worth a conflict with your parents? Not get the bike right away, as soon as possible? That was a new thought. But something had shifted in his thinking. I talked about how this Christian Science treatment or prayer stirs something new in us. And I think something in their conversation, or maybe something in the way that practitioner had prayed earlier in the day, was softening his heart. Because as he thought about it, he realized, this is something that I can do. I can wait a year and graduate high school and move out on my own and then buy the motorcycle. And he tells me that when he made that decision, he actually felt relieved. I think we can relate to that. I think I've felt that sometimes before. So the two of them finish their conversation. He hangs up the phone, and he realizes in that moment that all the symptoms are gone. The swelling that had made it impossible for him to eat normally for several days, instantly gone. The pain was gone. His teeth felt great. He went downstairs and had a nice normal dinner with his family, first time in days. I think that really hit the spot. Then over the next several weeks, his wisdom teeth did come in comfortably, naturally. He still has them today in good working order. And the motorcycle came along at just the right time, too. That decision that he made to do the bigger thing, to do the harder thing, to honor his mom and dad. He wouldn't have said it that way, probably, but that decision that he made did not cause him to lose anything good at all. I mean, it was just the opposite. He gained joy and relief, a renewed relationship with his parents. I think he found, when he made that decision, he kind of put himself on the same level as them. I think he found more maturity, more manhood in that decision than he was going to find in the motorcycle. And he found unexpected, quick healing as well, too. I mean, he found that unexpected way forward that I'm talking about. I think anytime we feel stuck like that, and it could be all kinds of things. I mean, it can be an argument with your parents or a swollen mouth, but it could be other things, too. I mean, not feeling well or being unemployed or whatever. Whenever we feel stuck, and like I said earlier, what we're trying isn't working, it seems like what really makes a difference, what really moves the needle in situations like that is the humility that kid showed. Or even sacrifice. Just bear with me on the word sacrifice. I know that word's not always popular, but sacrifice can be surprisingly rewarding. Because it shows us that our happiness is not as based on the thing we want or our prayer going through, our plan going through, as we thought it was. I mean, actually, our happiness flows a lot more freely than that. It really has to do with discerning and contributing to the good that's going on. Anytime we feel stuck, there is a higher context that we can find, a higher perspective with healing solutions in it. But I can't talk about those healing solutions or this higher, larger context without talking about God. And so that's where I want to start now. I want to talk about God and God's nature and us and our nature. And I want to talk about Jesus, probably the world's best example. I'm going to say the world's best example. The world's best example of somebody giving freely of himself. And then I want to talk a little bit about the science behind this. You know, I've gotten to share this message before. About 2 years ago, I got to share it with some girls at an orphanage in South Africa. Those girls aged like 5 to 18, and talk to them about giving freely of themselves. They knew what I was talking about right away. I mean, and they started chiming in with times when they had done that and seen the benefit. And then about 18 months later, I was sharing these ideas with a group of men, inmates in the LA jail system. They knew right what I was talking about too. You know, and they chimed in with their own stories, very different. The stories were different. The feeling and the resonating between the two groups was the same. And so what enables that kind of universal identification with this generosity of spirit that we want to be expressing? I want to talk about that science and its discoverer, and then an example or two if we have time. I have found as a practitioner of Christian Science, but probably even more so as a mom, as a citizen in the world that wants the best for humanity, I've found that it's really important to get a larger concept of God just about every day, or maybe a deeper concept. It seems like many of our problems just stem from a too small sense of God. You know, and I think when we expand that, it's really helpful. I find it's important not to relegate God to the role of superhuman. You know, talking about the nature of God, not a superhuman that makes arbitrary decisions about our lives, or, you know, that blesses some people but not others, or that feels distant. If I feel myself doing that too small sense, I find that the Bible is a really good antidote, especially the New Testament. The Bible puts forward this view of God as divine love. You know, not a superhuman, but a presence. Not something that judges and condemns and withholds, but something that welcomes and uplifts. In fact, you know, the Bible says God is a very present help in trouble. We can also think of God as infinite spirit. I really like this. Infinite spirit that animates us, that creates everything, that works on everyone's behalf. And when you start thinking of God that way, when you start thinking of God as infinite love or divine spirit, you start to see that, okay, this is what impels everything. This is what impels everything forward. It's God as love, or God as spirit, that impels us to find the qualities within ourselves that we most need. You know, like health, like the motorcycle kid, health, wholeness, wisdom, beauty, health, harmony, unity. That's just a little something of God's infinite loving nature. And I'll circle back to that. As I said, I like opening up our sense of God as much as we can. So having thought about that nature of God, then I think it's a really natural question to ask, what about us and our nature? You know, that's something that humanity has thought about for a really long time. I mean, they talk about it in the Bible. In the Hebrew scriptures, we're referred to in terms of God. In Psalms, it says, "It is God that hath made us, not we ourselves. We are God's people." I love that phrase, we are God's people. I felt a touch of that when we were all singing together. That feels uniting. I like thinking we are God's people when I walk into a crowded airport or something. I like how that scene looks to me. Or when you're walking up and down Mass Ave and you hear all the different languages, this is God's people. That gives you something really substantial to think about, that identity. And you probably have. You've probably thought about or wondered if your core identity, who you really are, isn't so much more than what's seen on the surface. I think that's kind of intuitive. I think we realize that we're something more than something physical that eats and breathes and rushes around and tries not to get sick and tries not to carry the baggage of bad decisions around or that type of thing. If we're God's people, we're like God. Like that better. We're like God. Just like works of art are like the artist that made them. Works of art show the beauty and the ideas and the essence, the nature of the artist. We show the nature of God. We're innately kind and wise, capable. We're innately capable of loving our neighbor, even when it seems difficult. We're innately capable of expressing all the qualities of God without interruption. And that's the reality of the universe. Qualities of God being expressed without interruption. And prayer shows us that. Prayer shows us that view of reality. I talked earlier about how the motorcycle kid, that's what I'm going to call him, found some really nice progress and healing when he turned to prayer. What was going on there? Or how can we do that? There are a lot of ways to pray, certainly. But I think one element that's common to any really sincere, heartfelt prayer is just this deep desire to be more aware of God in our experience. Be more aware of God's presence, or to feel it. That's what we want, to feel welcomed by love. That's what I want to feel when I sit down to pray. To feel animated by divine spirit. That type of prayer, when you really feel that abundance of divine love, it stirs something in you, and I think you can't help in those moments of really feeling God's presence. You start to remember, to discover or rediscover your own spiritual nature. Truly transformative prayer starts that way. It starts with ideas about God and God's nature. A friend of mine said recently that prayer begins when God speaks. I love that. So prayer starts with these new stirring ideas about God's nature and about our nature, and then are agreeing with those ideas. That's the key part. We agree with those ideas. And then the larger view that you get from that uplifted outlook, isn't something that you're trying to make happen. It's reality, and we experience it. Prayer shows you that larger context with healing solutions in it. So let's talk a little bit about the one who most recognized this larger context. Who lived in this good reality, as we all do, and was consistently aware of it. Who saw humility and moral courage and good actions as a way of bringing everybody and everything forward, not just himself. You probably know I'm talking about Jesus. Jesus showed the world something of God's nature that it had never known before. Brought that unique message. And that's what we celebrate at Christmas. I think because of his healing works alone, curing disease that was considered incurable, or calming storms, that would be really useful today, very relevant to us. Feeding huge groups of people with a small amount of food. Because of his healing works alone, Jesus stands out as I said, the best example we have of somebody who gave freely of himself. And that's why I want to talk about him. Everything he did pointed to the abundance of divine love. he showed us the value of giving of ourselves and the unexpected reward, and showed us that we're better at it than we realize. I think I said earlier, sometimes when we feel stuck, for whatever reason, we feel like the best thing that we can do in that moment is just get by, like stay under the radar at work, or see if somebody else does something, or wait and see if the circumstances change. But Jesus showed us that even in circumstances like that, and maybe especially in circumstances like that, the ball is in our court so much more than we realize. There's always something good and tangible that we can do. And it's really all about love. And by that, I mean the love that does something, the love that steps up to the plate, that sees the need and fulfills it. Jesus talked about love quite a bit. He very much recognized the healing power of divine love and wanted everybody to experience that as much as possible. From his followers to us today. There's this great scene where he's talking with his disciples, and he tells them that if they can love one another like he did, even when it was difficult, and I bet it was difficult sometimes, but if they could do that, they would find reliable joy. That's so relevant to what we're talking about tonight. Our joy comes from contributing to the good that's going on. There's so many ways to do that. We're not all going to wait a year and then buy a motorcycle. That was the motorcycle kid's way forward. But I find that this giving of ourselves is so individualized. If you feel stuck, or if you're really yearning for healing for yourself or for somebody else, and you get quiet and thought, maybe pray in some of the ways that I talked about, there often comes a little nudge from divine love about how you might give more of yourself, or even give something up. This is not the world's way. I recognize that. That's why I call this an unexpected way forward. If you feel stuck, like you're unemployed, or your sweetie broke up with you, or your back hurts, or whatever, if you feel stuck and you type in to Google, your problem and look for an answer, you Google a response, the internet's hardly ever going to advocate for giving of yourself. Have you tried sacrificing? That's not the typical answer that we get. But that's why I call it an unexpected way forward. The promise, it's God-impelled, and the recompense is just beautiful. It's just part of this divine love that operates unspent, that keeps giving. As I said, there's so many ways to do this, to give freely of ourselves. Let's think about some examples. And I'm sure you all are thinking of times probably that you've done this, that you know what this feels like. But probably for many of us, giving of ourselves happens at work. Maybe there's some new task in your job that looks kind of intimidating. It seems totally natural to your boss that you do it, but you think it looks a little bit daunting. A lot of times giving of ourselves is accepting the challenge, stepping up that way, accepting the challenge, and see how we grow into it, see the good that grows out of that. Another way we can give of ourselves is forgiveness. I can tell how effective this is because of how I feel when I talk about it. Maybe there's somebody in your life that you feel like wronged you or was hurtful or something, and maybe you've kind of forgotten about them or written them off or something. Giving freely of ourselves can be forgiving them and maybe even finding ways to support them going forward. And I think what makes it difficult, or what makes it seem difficult to forgive, is because we feel like the other person has all the power. Like they did something wrong and now they're just kind of cluelessly going off and they don't feel much remorse or anything. They seem to just be kind of free and we're struggling. But it's not like that at all. Actually, when you forgive somebody, you're often the only person in the world that can give to them in that specific way, that can release them that way and release yourself. Other ways we can give of ourselves it can be something simple, like sharing some spiritual ideas with somebody that you don't usually talk to about God, or offering to pray for somebody. I know a lot of us have been thinking about that too. I mean, just offering, maybe unexpectedly offering to pray for somebody. So that's, showing some spiritual confidence, talking a little bit more. Sometimes giving freely of ourselves is talking less, like at a meeting, letting somebody else's light shine. It really has to do with wanting to give to the world or to all of humanity without thinking about the recompense. I think all those ways that I just talked about giving of ourselves, those nudges, those possibilities come from divine love. And so they bring joy, not just to the recipients, but to the giver too. And that's really my message. When we give of ourselves, we're not trying to get something from the world or from another person. That kind of transactional giving doesn't bring unexpected healing or joy. You're just kind of doing what the world thought you were going to do. And that's okay. But when we give freely, that's when things get really interesting. It's not that you get something as much as you discover the good that's already there. I mean, you discover the health or the strength or the wisdom, the supply. You discover that larger context with healing solutions in it. Who wouldn't want that? And then anything that's unlike God, like a sore jaw or an argument with your parents or sadness or injury or anything like that, just loses its grip. It's just not part of this larger space that we inhabit. I think Jesus understood that. It's my understanding that he saw and even taught that. I think that's what Jesus was talking about when he said, I am come that they might have life and that they have it abundantly. This is the abundant living he was talking about. It's not about accumulating stuff. It's about spiritual discovery, seeing what we have within to contribute, and letting God bring that out in us and magnifying it, letting that impel us forward to do something good and big in the world, or at least in our corner of the world. And I'm sure that sounds good. We could probably all go around and talk about times that we've done that or seen it, and I'm sure it just seems so appealing and natural. I have to admit that giving sometimes starts with some tough moments. Not because what we're giving up is all that, and not because what we're letting go of, not because what we're stepping up to, I should say, not because what we're agreeing to do, like taking on the new job, not because that's too hard. I mean, neither of those is true. But I think sometimes this giving can feel like it starts with a tough moment because we have to give up an old view. That's what it is, an old view of ourselves or the world or our neighbor or something like that somehow has come to feel kind of entrenched. But those old opinions only seem rock solid until you test them a little bit and discover that they're not. That is a great feeling. And then you just see them fall away, and you're just opened up to see and receive and experience and express the good that just makes our hearts sing. Like the motorcycle kid did. Just opened up his world. When that happens, you feel part of something bigger than yourself. You feel some momentum that you're not making happen. You feel yourself led forward by that. And that influence for good, that divine influence for good that impels us forward in that moment has a really special name in the Bible. It's Christ. That's the loving, healing activity of God working on our behalf, working for everybody. And that influence for good just filled Jesus' thought, and so his life. It filled the lives of people around him. And he was known by the title Christ because of how he proved that presence, that presence of God with us, or it's sometimes called Emmanuel. He proved that presence. And that Christ presence is timeless, too. I mean, you see evidence of it in the Hebrew Scriptures, and of course in Jesus' healing ministry. You certainly see that touch of that healing, loving activity of God. You see it later in the Acts of the Apostles, and today as well. In 2024, when you get a good idea of how to help a neighbor or really how to mitigate climate change or, have a healing impact on government or anything like that, that's Christ working in us. It's timeless, too. As I said, it's here right now. In fact, it says in the New Testament, we continue to share in all that Christ has for us. Well, somebody who showed that we continue to share in all that Christ has for us in a really practical way was Mary Baker Eddy. Some of you might know that she's the discoverer of Christian Science. I mentioned earlier that I wanted to talk about the science behind the healing that I'm talking about, the giving, the living. What makes this universal and understandable to all of us? So I want to talk a little bit about its discoverer. All the ideas that I've talked about tonight come from my understanding of Christian Science. And so I want to talk about Mary Baker Eddy as its discoverer. She was born in 1821 to a devout New England family, close to where we are. By devout, I mean devoutly Christian, to parents who loved the Bible. I mean, they loved and quoted that Bible to their kids and read it and debated its meaning. And so Mary and her 5 siblings just grew up in this atmosphere of spiritual discovery and prayer and Bible reading and church going. And in all of that, and this was really in her youth and in her young adulthood, she discovered something of the healing power of God-centered living. That probably sounds rather intuitive to us, but I mean, she was really searching for a reliable system of health and well-being. And she was doing that for a couple reasons. Like a lot of people in her era, I mean, I've read this from biographers and stuff, she struggled with chronic ill health. I mean, that was not uncommon. And like all of us, she wanted to feel good, and so I think she really pursued health from a personal standpoint. She wanted to find healing, but she also just had a heart that yearned for humanity. She wanted to find healing for those around her. I mean, she wanted to relieve the suffering of humanity. And so that was kind of a two-pronged motivation for her to search for health and well-being. And so then she did that. It was during this time of exploration and looking for health and well-being that she really began to pray. We can pray thoroughly in search of well-being. She, as I said, struggled with chronic ill health and found that as she prayed, prayers that had deepened over the years, as she deepened her relationship with God, she found herself suddenly healed of some acute injuries that were thought to be life-threatening. I mean, that just changed her life in those moments. But she was also lifted out of decades of chronic ill health. Well, that had a huge impact on her. I mean, I think it would have a huge impact on anybody, but especially somebody who was yearning to find out a way forward, as she was for herself and for humanity. And so she discovered that she really wanted to share these ideas. I mean, when she found the reliable healing, it was during this time, I'm kind of collapsing events that happened in her life, but it was a very impactful time, and it was during this time that she discovered what she came to call Christian Science. That is an explanation of God's nature. We've scratched the surface of it. It's an explanation of our nature as part of God's creation. Christian Science, I have found, shows our unbreakable relationship with divine love and practicing Christian Science brings a fuller experience of God's presence. And that's an experience that necessarily includes healing for ourselves and for those around us. There is a reliable, universal method behind the healing work that Jesus did. There's a science there to be discerned and experienced. And when Mary Baker Eddy discovered that science, she found that she was able to heal herself and others of all kind of chronic and acute disease. And it became her life work then to impart those ideas to the world. So she started by, she was really impelled to do that. She started by going to the local Christian churches in her area, talking to the pastors and the ministers about this healing principle, this Christian healing principle that she had discovered, totally expecting that they would start preaching it from their pulpits. And when that didn't happen, she realized that if she was going to get the word out, she was going to have to do it in writing. And so she wrote about her discovery and her findings in her book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. I'm so grateful that she did that. I'm so grateful that she not only discovered the healing method that Christ Jesus had been practicing, but also that she wrestled with the ideas until she made them her own, and then articulated them in a way that would endure for humanity in her book. The ideas in Science and Health, as I've said, have changed my life, transformed my life. The textbook of Christian Science explains to readers how to heal themselves and others. And so as you can imagine, just for context, this was in the 1800s. As I said, life was difficult. Life on the farm was difficult. Life in the factory was difficult. And when readers discovered something of God's true nature, their own nature, they found healing on all kinds of levels. So demand for the book really grew. Her reputation as a healer grew. And as a result, many people have written biographies of Mary Baker Eddy, and there's an anecdote in one of them that I want to share here. It has to do with giving freely of ourselves. But for context, Mary Baker Eddy discovers Christian Science in 1866. And as I said, from that point on, she is just on fire to share the ideas. She mostly does that through healing. That's really the way that she gets the message out the most. But she's also teaching, traveling, preaching, and writing and publishing her book. By the end of the century, by 1900 or so, her life is really focused on teaching and writing and publishing her book. By that time, her students are doing a lot of the healing work. There's this rising generation of healers. But at the same time, there was a local man in New England, a sea captain named Joseph Eastman, who had just returned from a long sea voyage to Peru and back, to discover his wife, who had been bedridden when he left, in worse shape than before. He was very concerned for her health, probably concerned for her life, frankly. But he had just heard of Mary Baker Eddy, this local woman who was taking prayer requests and responding in real time and healing people of all kinds of things. And he lived close enough to her that he felt like he could go right and visit her. So he did. He went to her house and explained the situation to her and asked her if she could heal his wife. And to his amazement, Mary Baker Eddy responded with this heart full of love and respect, I think. She said, "Captain Eastman, why don't you heal your wife yourself?" He wasn't expecting that. He had just heard of Christian Science. He had just heard of Mary Baker Eddy. But I think she recognized something. I think she recognized that if Captain Eastman were willing to be involved in the healing work, if he wanted to be part of the healing, that was going to do more for him and his family and his community even than if she took the case. Something like the difference between giving somebody a fish and teaching them to fish. So she was giving of herself as she did that. She was about to start teaching a class on spiritual healing and Christian Science, and she invited Captain Eastman to enroll in it, which he did. He began praying for his wife, who improved until complete recovery took place. She was so thrilled and renewed and grateful and amazed that she then enrolled in a course with Mary Baker Eddy on spiritual healing and Christian Science. And in time, both Captain Eastman and Mrs. Eastman, both husband and wife, became full-time public practitioners of Christian Science in their community. Doing the same job that the lady who the motorcycle kid called. That same job of responding with Christian Science treatment and healing. What had started as an invalid woman and her concerned husband became this power couple, that helped and healed in their community for decades. I love thinking about how that unfolded. I think Mrs. Eastman found healing when Captain Eastman realized that there was this reliable, timeless, scientific basis for healing that he and anybody could practice. That recognition or that admission to himself took some moral courage. I'm sure I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when he had that kind of aha moment, because I'm sure it might have seemed easier to let somebody else take the case. But Eastman, like all of us, had something within himself, something wonderful and good, this ability to heal. Had something within him that his community needed. And Christian Science showed him that, showed him that life was bigger and better than he realized. And he had something to contribute to that. And we all do. It really has to do with discovering the impact that a person can have on the whole world or on all of humanity. Mary Baker Eddy writes about this in one of her books. She's speaking rhetorically, this idea of being able to touch all of humanity. She says, "Who should care for everyone? It's enough, say they, to care for a few." And then she kind of switches. "But the good done and the love that foresees more to do stimulate philanthropy and are an ever-present reward." I love that. I love how she talks both sides, too. Who should care for everybody? It's enough, they say, to care for a few. But the good done, the love that foresees more to do, stimulate philanthropy and are an ever-present reward. When we find our lives in the love that foresees more to do, we find that ever-present reward that she's talking about. And it's really joyful. I have found that the joy that comes in those moments of stepping back a little bit, recognizing what the situation demands, finding the ability to respond within us. The joy that comes in those moments eclipses any feeling of needing or wanting something ourselves. And I don't mean that we don't get everything that we need, because we absolutely do. But something has shifted now. Like it did for the motorcycle kid, like it did for Captain Eastman. And we recognize that it's divine love that's impelling our lives forward. It's like being in a dark room or something and seeing a light switch on the other side of the space. You just start walking towards it. And as you're striding towards it, you're not thinking about yourself or lack or your body or anything like that. You're bringing light to the room. That's what you're doing in that moment. And you flip that switch and everybody's illuminated, including you. I think that's the feeling that we're talking about. I was thinking today about my mom just loved babies. She still does, babies and toddlers. I think that was her favorite. That was her favorite chapter of our lives when we were that little. But she told me that she would often find herself, like in the middle of the night, one of us as a baby or toddler might cry and just need some help in the night. And she said she would just find herself in our room. She didn't even remember waking up, getting out of bed, and she just was impelled by Spirit to be there. And I think that's that feeling that we're talking about. And you discover that unexpected way forward yourself as well. I mentioned that when Mary Baker Eddy discovered Christian Science, that it just burned within her. As I said, her heart yearned for humanity. And so I want to talk just a little bit about her book, Science and Health, because it's really an example of the outcome of a life that was dedicated to caring for everybody. These are two different books that I've referred to. There's the Bible and Science and Health. The Bible is a timeless guide that's filled with God's Word. It's filled with counsel directly from God. It's got accounts of people having really profound experiences with God. And there's an account or a description of Christ Jesus' healing ministry. Science and Health explains the Bible. It shows the practicality of the ideas in the Bible. It's often taken a verse or a passage in either one of the Testaments and explained it in a way that I can use. I can use that practical understanding and wisdom and see it heal in my life, in real time. It is very practical. I may have mentioned the last 100 pages of Science and Health are letters that were written by people who were healed just by reading the ideas in the book. As I said, when they found something of their true nature, when we find something of God's true nature, it brings healing on all kinds of levels. So I'd like to share one more example here of what I'm talking about in this giving freely of ourselves and what we all gain. And this is an example, it's from my own life, of a time when I felt that, I think I used the phrase earlier, I found that view of God, that divine love that operates unspent. I found that I could give freely of myself and not lose anything at all. You never regret loving your neighbor selflessly. You never go into debt for that. There's just such a beautiful recompense that's just dependable. But as I said, you're not thinking about that. You're not thinking about the recompense when you're giving of yourself. It's impelled by God. It's just so natural. So this last story that I want to share, I was in graduate school, and I had a rash, really uncomfortable, unsightly rash on my chest that would not budge. It had been there for two years plus, I think, and sometimes it was inflamed, sometimes it would die down a little bit, but it never really went away. And it didn't really hurt, and because I could hide it with the right clothes, I just didn't do anything about it. I also think that was kind of a reflection of how I was living my life at the time. I hadn't found the clarity or the confidence that comes with giving of myself or a God-centered life. Finding that higher context with healing solutions in it wasn't really on my screen. Life felt like something that just happened to me, and I reacted as well as I could. But I was growing. I was a young adult. I was developing a relationship with God. I liked the idea of healing. That certainly appealed to me. And I was praying in my free time. I was reading the Bible. I was reading Science and Health. And one day I came across a line in Science and Health that was really meaningful to me. It said, inflammation, it's just what I was dealing with, inflammation is fear, an excited state of mortals that is not normal. I was really struck by how precisely that was expressed. It was almost mathematical. It was like inflammation equals fear. If you're inflamed, you're probably afraid. Well, I wasn't afraid. I didn't think. But then after I reflected on it a little while, I realized that there were instances in my life when I was making decisions based on fear. For example, I would stay in unhealthy relationships too long because I was afraid to navigate life alone. If I was honest with myself, that was it. I was afraid of being alone. I was in a pretty challenging graduate program, not because I loved the field, but because I was afraid of not getting a good job otherwise. I even packed too much lunch in the morning because I was afraid of being hungry in the afternoon. I was so glad that these fears had kind of bubbled to the surface. I didn't know exactly what to do with them, but I knew they were not helpful. They were making me feel too focused on myself. They were making my life feel small. That was it, and that feeling, that self-centered or small feeling, is what the Bible refers to as the carnal mind. And or sometimes the Bible uses the word tempter or accuser, but it's anything that pulls thought from this abundance of divine love onto self or lack or anything too small like that. The good news is the carnal mind does not have any intelligence. I mean, it wasn't like I took this really reasonable assessment of my life and found that it was too hard for me. I mean, that wasn't it. It was fear that was making me feel inadequate. And when I realized that, I immediately thought of a Bible verse that maybe many of you are familiar with probably, that says, there is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. The only perfect love I knew was God. God's love is abundant and reliable and effective. And so I thought, okay, what's it going to feel like to make decisions based on love? That has a totally different feeling. And so I just really made an effort to be as aware as possible of the instances of divine love that were already taking place in my life. And it wasn't hard. I mean, I was a grad student. I had this cute little apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and safe. It was close to campus. I was grateful for that. I had family and friends nearby. I had a job. It wasn't lucrative, but it put me through grad school. I was grateful for all those things. And I knew all those good things had their root in divine love. And from there, I started seeing instances of divine love just throughout the day, not just in my own experience, but, little things which we all experience. When somebody's kind at the grocery store when they could have been abrupt. Or little kids playing, that's the best. I'd walk to school in the morning and I'd go by playgrounds and see little kids just kind of delighted with each other and laughing because life is wonderful. That felt really good. That was those instances of seeing love just permeate my whole experience. Permeate creation in general. And that feeling, once I kind of realized that, it made me feel both safe, that felt good, but also capable. I found a strength within. I found I like being part of this good reality. I want to contribute to this. And that gave me the courage to ask myself some questions. Was I in these relationships to be part of something bigger than myself, that might grow and actually bless other people? Or was I just trying to stay comfortable in a too small life? Was I in this graduate program to contribute to the field, maybe do something that could help others? Or was I trying to get just the right professor's name on my resume so that I would get a good job? And once I articulated the questions like that, it was pretty easy for me to answer them. And these were really transforming actions, I think, that came from that. It would have seemed impossible even a week earlier. But I found the courage to leave these unhealthy relationships for good. I'm thinking of how to articulate, what does that have to do with giving? Instead of filling in my evenings with spending time with somebody that I didn't really see a future with, could I set myself and them free to find what God was bringing out in us? And I admit there were some nights that I spent alone, evenings that I spent alone, but divine love filled them in like nothing else could, and I found that. I didn't leave my graduate program, but I tweaked it a little bit. And instead of chasing this one professor, I thought of, just kind of spontaneously thought of somebody else that I could work with. And she and I had a wonderful time writing my dissertation together, and it ended up being a success, and it was quoted by the research community. That was wonderful. Everything was just opening up. I think my eating habits even got better. I stopped kind of finding solace in food. And again, I let love fill in the space. So all of that was wonderful. I think I was feeling something like the Motorcycle Kid or Captain Easterman, in that I was going from victim to healer in the community. I say that because it was such a transformational time for me. Well, just a week or two later, after making those decisions and taking those actions, I was changing clothes and I discovered that my skin was completely clean and clear, no trace of inflammation or fear or irritation, No trace of rash. I was delighted. And I say this was transformative because it was more than just that physical healing. I mean, as I said, I found myself finding a spiritual maturity and joy and love, and finding that love that operates unspent in our lives. I started getting prayer requests from family and friends. Too, is that kind of transformation. This is how we give. At Christmas time or any time, this is how we give of ourselves. Giving freely of ourselves is quiet work. I mean, it's often you and God working out something together that then the world feels the effects of. It's what's needed. And you all have everything you need. I mean, your own prayers and the ideas that you get from reading the Bible and from reading Science and Health, the textbook of Christian Science, will give you everything you need to bless and be blessed, to give freely and to gain all. Thank you all for coming, and happy Christmas.
Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon virgin mother and child. So tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace. Silent night, holy night, shepherds quake at the sight, glory stream from heaven afar. Heavenly hosts sing Alleluia. Christ the Savior is born. Christ the Savior is born. Silent night, holy night, wondrous star, lend thy light, with the angels let us sing. Alleluia to our King. Christ the Savior is born. Christ the Savior is born.